Hello, my name's Fiona Kamari Campbell. I'm a Professor of Disability and Ableism Studies at the University of Dundee. This presentation, which I've labelled Ableism, a Field of Tension, is a visual reflection on a lithograph drawn by Théodore Géricault, titled Paralytic Woman in 1821. Now, before moving on to the image, I just want to say a little bit about Théodore Géricault. He spent nearly a year in London, in working class areas, drawing street scenes. And towards the end of 1821, he returned back to his homeland of France, and he was actually in poor health, which suggests that he was very much an observer of the state of play in the working class areas of London. What's really interesting is that he was attempting to try out a method, a lithographic method, which was fairly new at the time, and to show that he could actually master that. When he returned back to France, he went and did a series of paintings. He's known as a painter. In 1821, he actually started 10 portraits of the insane. And that was in the form of what's called expressive realism. And in each of these 10 portraits, he wanted to showcase and highlight the psychological discomfort of individuals, but also of the viewer, and to explore the arena of discomfort. So it's quite interesting. So we'll move on to the next slide. Now, this is the main slide. This is the slide titled A Paralytic Woman. And it's an incredible image. What we'll see is that there are 3 frames of reference in this slide. There's in the blackened, heavily drawn image in the centre, which automatically the viewer's gaze is directed to, and that is of a middle-aged woman in a fairly makeshift wheelchair. Actually, it looks more like a cart from my perspective, and being pulled along eastwards on this streetscape somewhere. In fact, it almost looks like the path, footpath or the pavement ends. But equally, we have the other frame, which is on your left. Moving westward, we have a figure of a young woman and a toddler, young child. Now, it's easy to miss. You might think, well, look, there's just really 2 frames of reference in this image. But in fact, there's 3, because on the extreme right, we have this fuzzy kind of greyed out shaded image. And we'll talk about that later, because that also is a frame of reference. And in fact, the reason why I have titled this talk Ableism, the Field of Tension, is there are tensions built into this still image, which are captured by these 3 frames that are just juxtaposed with each other. One thing I want to say about this image before moving on is there is no attempt to exaggerate any of the representations. It looks like it's a reasonable representation of of what life was like at the time. And what's really impressive for me from the point of view of trying to ascertain people's views about ableism, about ability, about disability, about positive and negative representations of humanness is we get, this is a street scene. We get a glimpse into a portraiture, not portraiture, but a representation in 1821 in London. Okay, let's move on. Now, one of the things that you might have missed in the picture is at behind the woman and girl. In fact, I'll go back to that. There you go. You can have a look. Behind the young woman and girl, there are some bars. Let's have a move at this. So actually, that particular image that I've now enlarged actually frames her point of reference. So she's framed in by that. You see, actually, the bars stop just before we move on to the next frame, which is of the disabled woman and the man. So what could be going on here? Well, firstly, you get a sense of bars. Now, I guess the viewer might be wondering, are they the bars of a hospital, a workhouse, a prison, or indeed an asylum? And rather sneakily, in the right corner there is a remnants of a peeling poster that's been posted on the wall, rather what we see today as well. And the poster is about, they're selling a remedy for some sort of thing. So it's a remedy of hope. So we've got these, again, these really, even within this one little area of the image, we've got this kind of tension between a lack of hope, being incarcerated, the bars, and then next to it, we've got this really interesting holding out a sense of hope, maybe even a cure or some sort of change. And they're next to each other. But the fact that it's ripped is, I think, quite interesting too. I mean, you know, maybe it's a false hope. Maybe it's a hope that never worked out. Who's to say? Who's to say? Okay. Let's go to the image of the middle-aged woman. And I think she is middle-aged. I wouldn't say she's an elderly person. She strikes me, as much as you can kind of have a look, maybe she's in her 60s, maybe she's even younger. Hard to say. She's looking down. She's looking very depressed, maybe, or looking out of balance, out of control. She almost seems like she's stuck in this kind of futility, a sense of futility. Her eyes aren't wide open. Maybe she's just feeling sick. Maybe she's in pain. So one of the things about this is that her clothes are dark. Some authors, some commentators have suggested that, in fact, that maybe she also is mentally ill as well as paralysed. It's hard to say. I mean, you could be reading into it. One commentator suggests that the robes, the jacket there looks like a straight jacket, suggesting that she's a mentally ill patient that's being transported out of the asylum, or maybe indeed into an asylum. I'm not so convinced about that. I mean, there's a series of wrappings. It could just suggest that she's being wrapped up against the cold, and also just wrapped up for protection so her hands don't drop into the wheels. But nonetheless, it's really interesting from an ableist perspective to see how different commentators have read into it. One commentator, Alec Mishori, suggests that she is mentally ill rather than a prostitute ravaged by syphilis, on the basis of this straitjacket. The other thing in looking at this image is, you know, this woman is weakened, she's stressed, she's in crisis. She looks like she's got the weight of the world on her shoulders. She seems to be resigned to her fate. I think it's also exaggerated by the fact that she is being pulled along. She's being pulled westward. Sorry, not westward, eastward. You know, as a wheelchair user myself, you are, in this example, in a state of heightened vulnerability. You have no control over the person that is pulling you. In fact, she would be pushing it even to turn around and talk to him. He's in charge. So you're disempowered. You're also being pulled along, and what that suggests is you cannot see what is coming ahead of you. You can't see where you're going, and that can be incredibly destabilising. In fact, it can make you quite dizzy. She's also at an angle. She's been kind of tilted over. All she's got to see is where she's come from, looking back, being dragged away from a previous reality. So I'm not surprised that she's in the state that she's in. We also get a sense from looking at her, actually, despite the darkened clothing, her clothing is of good quality. She's got a really nice pair of shoes. She's got a really nice bonnet. So, you know, would appear on sight to be a woman who possibly has lived better times and who's fallen from grace, so to speak. And here we have the man pulling her. My initial impression when I was looking at him was he looks like a bit of a vagabond, really. I mean, he's got clothes that look like they're kind of pulled together. They don't really match each other. His pants have got rips and tears. He's had a hard life. He's probably one step removed from being a beggar. Maybe he's someone who works in one of these asylums or workhouses. Maybe he's, in fact, an ex-resident himself. Not a happy chappy, as we say. And again, some commentators have kind of, you know, emphasised the fact that he doesn't look like he's interested in what's happening to the woman that he's pulling. I think, in all fairness, it's probably a heavy-duty job. There's a bit of drudgery. The cart actually doesn't look like it was originally designed for a wheelchair. It looks like it could be a cart with boxes of apples or something in it. Either way, I imagine it's probably tough and painful. Definitely you get a sense of him representing the underclass. I want to speak a little bit more about him later. We'll just move on to the other image, which, as I said to you, is the third frame, and something that's very easy to miss because it's so blurry, it's in the background. It's not a convenient backdrop. So why? I've enlarged it here so we can see what's going on. So there's a couple of horses in the image, at least with their hind legs showing, and I think that this frame is also quite significant, because remember we talked about this field of tension. They are different reality spaces, right? We've got the girl and the young toddler, and we've got the wheelchair woman in the wheelchair, and the vagabond man, and we've got this. So one of the things that you can look at with this is you'll suddenly realise there's a horse and carriage, and there's a man with the carriage, and he's actually pulling a hearse, right? So that's really interesting, because you get this sense then of this juxtaposition between, as we move through the 3 points of images of life, optimum life, disabled, despairing life, and then deadened reality, right? So you get this sense then that, you know, we don't know where this woman is going, but certainly in this picture there is a sense of foreboding, a sense of gloom, that she, instead of having life improvement and hope, like with the remedies and medicines, that possibly life for her is going to lead to some kind of imminent death at some point, maybe. So this idea that her suffering is tragic, and you know, that juxtaposes with the next image, as I said, of the woman and child. But let's have a look at this image. So we've gone back to the left of the screen, and the woman is moving leftwards, west. Let's have a look at this, because this is a still image. It's like a snapshot, right? Something stops this woman in her tracks. She looks back, right? And she's holding onto the toddler with her hand quite strongly, but she's looking back. We don't know why she decided to stop. What we can potentially imagine is that she's moving, or she has moved, from the right to the left of the picture. So actually it's not in the picture, but when she was on the street, probably the first thing that her and the young toddler saw was our vagabond man, looking out of sorts, looking probably quite somber and looking quite scary. So that's what she would have seen. And, you know, this image also is an image of young women and older women, in fact, all women, on a public streetscape, and the fears and dangers and caution that women in public life and on the streets have to deal with, and that's still with us today. So she would have seen this rather dodgy character. Maybe she thought he was a thief, maybe she thought he was drunk, who knows? But I would argue that she already was put into a state of fear before she even saw the older woman who was disabled. In fact, the design of the chair and the fact that it was being pulled would suggest that she didn't even see the woman. Her first the first appearance would have actually been this rather spooky vagabond man. So she's moved past them, and she decides, she's so put into a state of fear, or at least in a state of curiosity, that she looks back. She wants to know what's going on. Do I have to watch this fellow? Is he going to turn around and come back at me? Now, some commentators have said, look, you know, the stare, I mean, this is where this is such a remarkable image. She does stare back. Is she staring in a state of fear, or is she staring, as some commentators have said, in a state of disgust because she's disturbed by this disabled woman in a wheelchair? It's hard to know. It could be curiosity, as I have already said to you. Either way, you know, this is not an unfamiliar scene even these days. Maybe she's looking back in response to the young toddler asking questions. In fact, we don't see the face of the young toddler, but she is facing the young woman. So maybe she's asking questions like, what is that contraption? What's wrong with that woman? The sort of conversations that happen today with children. Often children with curiosity will talk to adults when they've seen something that's unfamiliar and ask them why is that person in that device or in a wheelchair. They may not even know the name of a wheelchair. Or maybe the young toddler's talking about the creepy man. Who knows? So she's looking back to check out, trying to work out what's going on, doing a mental calculation. I don't think she's necessarily in a state of fear or disgust. She might be in a state of confusion and just, as I said, trying to work out what's going on. But it is a useful snapshot into what was happening in 1821. And again, as I said earlier, you could juxtapose it with a child who's asking about the person in the wheelchair, and the older person, in this case, this young woman, is a bit embarrassed, doesn't know what to say, and basically wants to pull the child along out of the frame, wants them to stop asking questions, at least embarrassment is caused. And here we have the child. And you'll notice with both the young woman and the young toddler, they're very much dressed in white, and there's a freshness about it. You know, look at this young woman here. There's almost a Michelangelo look. It's quite pristine, lovely stylized curly hair. The good life. Now, we don't know whether the young woman is a sister or whether she's a servant, but even if she was a servant, definitely clean. Life's looking up, maybe. They are not impoverished. At least you don't get that impression. So you've got this, again, this juxtaposition between the abled life, the good life, and that's typified in this young girl because, I mean, she's got amazing clothes, beautifully fashioned, probably the latest fashions of the time, curled hair. And she's got a rather expensive looking toy horse as well. You know, and as I made the point earlier, we don't have her face, but it seems to me that she's in conversation with the younger woman, maybe asking questions. But in true artistic fashion, what happens in this image is the horse itself, some commentators have argued, is also symbolic. And the symbolism then is between the horse in this image and the earlier greyed and blurry image of the horses carrying the hearse with the dead person on top. Here we have in this amazing image by Géricault is that this toy horse points to the fact that there are different worlds between rich and poor, and indeed humans and beasts, and they've all collided together in this extraordinary streetscape. And they've collided together in ways that don't always collide. In fact, these kind of realities, these schemas, are kept separate. The abled life is kept separate. The healthy, the up and coming, the aspirants on the left side of our screen very rarely mingle with the entrapped, the incarcerated, the poor, the suffering, and those with disabilities. Although, as I said to you, it's quite the role of the disabled woman is somewhat ambivalent. And then, of course, we've got this other kind of horror story happening on the extreme right, which is the hearse, the kind of symbolism of death and sorrow. And why I have called this image, which the drawer called the Paralytic Woman, I have reframed this as ableism, a field of tension, because here we have an example where these three states of life are colliding. They've been brought together and their intention. We don't know whether the young woman ends up talking with the disabled woman. We do know that the disabled woman is being wheeled away from a reality that she had previously experienced. She's vulnerable. She has no control. And she is almost a hostage. In fact, she is a hostage. And she's being led away by this rather spooky figure, who also, in his own way, is a hostage to labour relations of the time. And everything looks rather bleak in the setting. But it's a great example of looking at social attitudes and portrayals in 1821. And as I said, Géricault went on to paint some images of 10 people who were deemed mad or insane. So he was very interested in exploring the emotions around human difference. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that that's been quite useful. The final slide, which I've just put up here, is background information. You can have a look at that. This image is available via the Wellcome Trust. It's online. It's downloadable. So it's something that you might want to use for another purpose. Thank you again. And we'll see you soon.